Hello, I'm Jackie Lucky, your financial planning maestro. This series of podcasts is aimed at financial planning professionals and also those who are looking to enter the financial planning profession. We will be talking during the podcast about all things Certified Financial Planner certification related, talking to other CFPs around the world, and also we will be dropping in on some new entrants who've just entered the financial planning profession, and we'll be checking up along the way on a regular basis with them to see how they're getting on. I hope you enjoy today's podcast. Hello and welcome. I'm Jackie Lucky, your financial planning maestro. And today we are talking about the CISI Level 7 assessment en route to becoming a certified financial planner in the UK. And I'm joined by a very special guest, and that is Ciaran Quinlan, who is a Paraplanner at Close Brothers Asset Management. Hello, Ciaran.
Hi, Jackie. Thank you very much for having me on.
That's my pleasure. Thanks very much for letting me twist your arm and agreeing to come on to share your journey and lots of experiences and tips along the way, hopefully. But before we get into your journey to CFP, just give me a little potted history of how you came into the financial planning profession.
So a lot of people would usually answer that saying, "Oh, I've fallen into financial planning by accident." For me, it was very much by design. So I studied economics at university, and my final year dissertation, I decided to do it on the aging population. I heard about the subject on the radio one day in the car, and thought that would be something that would be quite interesting. And the main focus of it was on the state pension, particularly the feasibility of it going forward, given the old age dependency ratio. The main conclusion being enhanced private pension provision is a way to work around that. During my university years as well, I was in quite a competitive course of peers in the economics course, and there was a big drive and interest in getting these paid internships between terms, and these were usually for the big banks, big financial institutions, the big four, and I applied to those as well, just thinking it's the done thing. This is what I'm supposed to be doing, and didn't really know what I was applying for, and ended up not receiving any offers for a lot of these paid internships. I was first reserve for a few of them, but it actually turned out that was the best thing to happen to me, because what I did instead is I printed off a stack of CVs, and I got on my bike and I went around my local area, and I walked into financial planning firms and handed in my CV with a little cover letter and just said, I'm looking for a couple of weeks of unpaid shadowing. Really, I'm doing this dissertation. I've found that financial planning is a career you can do. Would that be okay? Unfortunately, a couple of advisors very kindly had me, and did a couple of weeks of shadowing, and then everything kind of snowballed from there. Really, I was hired straight out of university by a small financial planning firm. I was with them for 2 years. They were then acquired by a medium-sized financial planning firm, and again I was with them for another couple of years. And by that point, I'd done my chartered financial planner exams, and it was a bit of a crossroads, with what to do next. And I actually decided to take a year off to go traveling, and not just traveling, it ended up with doing the CFP. And so now, I'm at a larger company, Close Brothers Asset Management. And I feel quite fortunate to have seen, because I'm still relatively young in the industry, to have seen small, medium and large. And really excited for the road ahead.
Wow. That is I think you are probably the third person I've come across of the thousands of financial planners and paraplanners that I know out there over the last 20 odd years. Only the third person, I think, who has got into financial planning by design rather than falling into it. So, and that's fantastic to hear. And I think, thinking back to my economics days, I did A-level economics at school. Okay. And it was probably one of the most useful A-levels that I've ever done, and something that I apply or continue to apply on a daily basis in the financial planning profession. So it's great to hear. It's got so many aspects and helps you, I think, in the long term. It certainly helped me talk to clients when I was advising and kind of help them understand even, the nuances of things like we went through in the course, inflation or the impact of inflation, how it eats away at your money and your buying power and that kind of thing. Having a sound economics background, can really be an advantage in those kind of situations, can't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And the dissertation in the final year was just the cherry on top, really, being able to have that flexibility. And I didn't mean it to work out that way, but then it was actually a very useful thing to put on your CV. And financial planning was just the next logical step.
Yeah, fantastic. That's great to hear. Great to hear. Right. So you mentioned in there that you took your year out and did a little bit of traveling, but then actually got stuck into the CFP. So tell me how you came across the CFP and why you decided to do it then.
So I think I knew what I'd heard of the CFP in I guess you could say my first career, if you will, before I went traveling, but only in passing, that it was this alternate qualification that you could get. I think I knew it was with the CISI, but I was at that point very focused on getting chartered. So it just wasn't really on my radar. So the first time I really realized it could be an opportunity for me, I was still traveling, and I was coming towards the end of my trip, and you kind of have a realization when that's happening. You're going home, you kind of want to figure out what am I going to be doing when I get back. And so I remember where I was in Japan. I was on an underground train in Tokyo, and I'd re-downloaded the LinkedIn app, and there was an internet sort of down in the underground, and I was just scrolling, and then I came across some posts. I can't remember what page they were from, but it was about the Certified Financial Planner, specifically that if you've been a chartered financial planner with the CII, there is a pathway for you to become a certified financial planner, and not just that, it's a level above on the qualifications framework. It's a level 7, equivalent to a master's. So that was a big light bulb moment. And so I eventually came home. I came home primarily actually because it was my brother's wedding. I was his best man, and during that time, I was thinking, it's quite a binary decision when you come back from a trip. Am I going to continue traveling or do something completely different, or am I going to go back to work? And the CFP for me, I thought originally that it would be a nice thing to ease me back into the industry. However, I signed on to your course and did it, but soon realized that I wouldn't be putting ease and CFP in the same sentence for much longer. So I went with the third option, and sort of communicated that with my family. I was very privileged in that I had said to my family, look, I want to do this course. It's 10 weeks. It's equivalent to a master's. It's going to help, I guess, fill in that gap in my resume, and it could help me find a job and, all these other things. And so I had the full support of them. So I was really, really fortunate to have that and didn't take it for granted. For those 10 weeks, I could just stay with family, didn't have to focus on anything else but the CFP. And the rest was history, really.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. Right. I think, having the support of friends and family around you is probably one of the most vital times when you're doing the level 7 assessment, isn't it? Because it just sucks you down a black hole. And I know that we talked during the course of being, sucked down all these rabbit holes, never to be seen again.
Absolutely. I had to restart my entire case study, all the work I was doing several times. I'd go through your instructions with the spreadsheets. The spreadsheets were actually fine. There was just things that weren't clicking, which I'm sure I'll talk about later in the pod. But I would have to completely restart all these documents. But what that actually ended up doing, I then could understand how these, how all the different spreadsheets fitted together in a lot more detail. So it was actually more useful in the long run. But as you said, there was a lot of venting to my family between all of that. So
yes. Oh, bless you. So let's get into the nitty gritty of what your experience was like during the time you were completing your case study assessment. So tell us a little bit about how you approached it at the very start.
Probably not a model student for this. So at the beginning, I ran into a lot of problems. I think having an entire year away from financial planning, I didn't really think about financial planning. It was quite optimistic what I was doing. I soon realized there were little things when I was looking at the fact find. I noticed that the clients spent roughly £6,000 a year on clothes. So it's about £6,000 a year on clothes, which I looked at that and just thought, well, that's clearly, a bit silly. We can cut that down and put that towards your financial objectives. So when you and I, Jackie, we had our first face-to-face call, because you get 2 calls with the course included. Explaining, so they spend £6,000 a year on clothes. That's so I've just put a line through that. I assume that's okay, because it's not really essential, is it? And I got a very blank response from you to say, no, it's a fact find. Those are facts. You can't change the facts. Additionally, there was also a situation where so one of my clients, he had some health problems, and so it was one of the stress test scenarios where he dies. And I remember asking you, could I just half some of their expenditure, assuming that Daniel had died? And again, I had the response from you, well, imagine you're going on holiday and you're going alone, but then you add someone else to your booking. That's not going to double the cost of the holiday, is it? So, which I thought was a very good point. And it was around that time I stopped viewing it really as this test or exam I was trying to work my way around. I then started viewing it as real. So those 2 humbling experiences were very useful for me. And then, so after that, really getting into then, the nitty gritty of it, you need to be able to represent your fact find baseline. That needs to be a complete, true representation of what the fact find says. Everyone then has a capital requirement. I know some people had school fees. I had the boat purchase, which is another story in itself. And so you need to fulfill that capital need. Usually it's going to involve, I don't know, selling a portfolio or selling some assets. And so some cash might come in, but nothing else you should be changing with that. Don't go crossing off any of their expenditure because you think £6,000 a year on clothes isn't great. But I kept everything the same except for one more boat, a little bit more cash, and then minus that portfolio. You now have your new baseline, which is probably the most important one to have, and you need to be able to recreate that so you haven't made it by accident. It's from there you then go through your 5 stress tests, and then eventually you get your final recommendation. And again, you need to be able to recreate all of those. So it's no good recreating these once and going with the numbers, because there could be an error. And if you're able to recreate with your assumptions, then you're doing it right. So yes. And then I guess and then the final thing I'd say in terms of my approach to it, towards the end, once you've you understand what you're doing, it's all about presentation. So I would make it very easy for the examiner to spot where some of these points on the assessment standards are. So, for example, once I'd effectively finished my case study, I went through the assessment standards one by one and just tried to hoover up as many points as I could, including the wording in some of some areas of the report. Absolutely. For example, one of them was, has the candidate explained the client's attitude to saving and investment? I realized that I'd alluded to it. It was, you could infer it, but it's probably, you don't want to leave that up to chance. So I just added in a simple sentence. I'd explained it, and then I said, as such, this shows that your attitude to saving is X, Y, Z. And then I think it's just, going through numerous drafts, you just refine it in the end. I did feel that the sample paper that you get from the CISI, it's not particularly, I guess, client friendly, but I guess that's not the purpose it's serving. It's more to, show the candidates what the sort of thing you need to be including. But yes. I think presentation is one of the main things you need to you need to focus on towards the end. It needs to sort of flow well. So
absolutely. And I think because it's such a complex piece of work, like we said at the start, it's level 7, isn't it? It's master's degree level. It's not going to be, some people say to me, oh, Jackie, can I just put the assessment standard in and then put a sentence explaining how I've met the assessment standard? And I do the usual blank expression, no. But how you create the plan and present it is of vital importance. And actually, it's vital importance to clients, to real people, isn't it? So, getting that flow. So when somebody reads it, they kind of go, right, okay, well, I know where I am now and I know where I want to be. And then, right, Ciaran's going to show me step by step, kind of holding my hand along the way, where my issues are, the decisions that need to be made in order for me to get from A to B.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's definitely how I describe it. It's important to have that flow. I think often with financial planning in the past, I've viewed financial planning as almost a loose alliance between different domains. Take, for example, the RO exams with the CII. That's where I did my exams with, rather than CISI.
Yeah.
But they segmented, all those exams. You had the pension exam, the investment exam, tax exam, protection exam. And I know you can kind of bring them together in that final written paper. But I always thought it was quite interesting. It was segmented like that. Whereas with the CFP, yes, you have maybe this bit's focusing on the retirement and this bit's focusing on tax. But each chapter, you can make it so that it feeds one into the other. And I'm quite a visual person, so the image that came to mind was almost like a closed loop. And it was quite satisfying in the end, just to create a report where you've got all of those, as I said, those domains, but they actually, fit together pieces of a bigger whole. So yes. Yeah, very satisfying.
Excellent. And you talked earlier about that you were okay with the spreadsheets. So how did you find the experience of, in the course, I showed you in the videos how to build out your spreadsheets, with if statements and things like that. Was that easy to get your head around?
I fancied myself as being a pretty confident with Excel and Microsoft Office in general. However, I didn't think that pretty soon after starting the course, because the length of some of these, I guess you could call it codes in that bar to create these formulae, which are highly complex and connect all these different tabs, was pretty bamboozling at the beginning. However, because I kept making the spreadsheet over and over again, eventually I actually thoroughly understood what I was writing and wouldn't even need to look at some of your notes sometimes. I knew that, I need to make this column do this. I know that I open the brackets and put the commas here, and it refers to different areas. I think given my sort of, I guess you could say, age or demographic, the technical, as in the the IT skills, I didn't find too difficult in the end, but it is a lot at the beginning. But the way it all fits together, I just thought was really powerful. The one tool in particular, which I didn't even know existed, was the goal seek tool on Excel.
Yep.
And to be able to, so you've created your cash flow, you've got the client's income and expenditure, and then you can see if they're in a surplus or if they're in a shortfall. So you've got at the bottom, say you've got a minus £500,000. That basically means, they are going to be that amount of money, in the red, because they don't have the assets and income to keep them sustained. You can highlight that number. You can go to goal seek. You can change that number to 0 by changing the initial portfolio you started with, and then click OK. And then what that provides you with is the amount of protection you need. There, you've just got your protection recommendation. So that kind of came completely by surprise when we did that for the first time. I thought, wow. And usually with pensions and investments and tax, they're kind of more together, but to actually involve protection in all of that cash flow, I'd probably just use the word powerful for it. Cash flow wasn't really an area that I'd had too much exposure to in my first career, but since my career break and doing the CFP, I think cash flow is always going to remain a part of what I do in financial planning going forward. And fortunately, the company I work for now is big into it as well. So,
that's fantastic.
absolutely.
Yeah, great to hear. I think, and it's really powerful. You can imagine that, now your level of understanding when you're doing it for real with clients. I mean, that must just give you a huge confidence boost.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's I often found with sitting those professional exams, a lot of it's effectively a memorization test, and I eventually got a good technique with it. But then I always kind of felt there was a bit of a gulf between the work I was doing day to day, the memorization of for these professional exams, but then the actual real life experience in the office. They were almost sort of two different islands. You needed both, but they were just a bit, a bit separated. What I felt with the CFP is, very much it joins up the two. And so, when you're interacting with clients in the future, being able to show them a full picture, including all of those different areas of financial planning, I think it's a great thing to be using.
Excellent. So would you say that, your biggest stumbling block of completing the level 7 assessment was the writing up part once you've kind of got your head around, why you're doing what you're doing on the spreadsheets? Would you say that was perhaps your biggest learning from the going through the assessment?
So in terms of the writing, I feel quite confident with the writing. It's probably the part of the job I'm doing at the moment that I enjoy the most. I like fashioning almost a little story, connecting the fact find to their objectives and why we're doing what we're doing. So I'd say that the writing, not so much. The one thing that I found quite difficult was you have often a lot of incomplete information in the fact find. So for me, that was probably one of the biggest stumbling blocks. For example, there was one small phrase towards the end of the fact find that I had not really looked at in quite a while. I'd gotten to the end of the assessment, and I thought, I'm going to read the fact find one more time. All the facts and figures were in there, but there was more of the qualitative stuff. I just wanted to make sure I got it absolutely correct. And there was one phrase in particular, and I can quote it here. It was, and it was in reference to passing their estate on to their beneficiaries. It was, they don't want them to have to pay any inheritance tax. So they don't want them to have to pay any inheritance tax. So I actually did Control F on my fact find to see any mentions of tax. There was no mention of tax in the fact find anywhere. Obviously, you write about it in the report, but there was no reference to tax in any of their objectives. So bearing in mind, I'd kind of got to the end of my report, and then I suddenly realised this, and I thought, oh no, have I done my IHT estate planning section completely wrong? So initially I thought, I don't really know how to interpret this. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I was going through those assessment standards to see what were the points I could hoover up. And there was one assessment standard which says, has the candidate clearly explained any exclusions for financial planning recommendations? And so I immediately thought, oh, I could actually use that to get that little point for this case. I felt that the wording was quite vague. Why I felt that was because, if you don't want them to have to pay any IHT, does that mean because they're happy for IHT to arise, but they want to have protection for it? Or do they want no IHT bill whatsoever? They're actually two different things. And because it wasn't clear enough, and because their objectives weren't to do with that, I then made the decision to exclude it. And I dedicated one whole page to that. It was like an English literature exam, having the quotes and then almost dissecting it and being like, "And for this reason," in conclusion. But it was worth it. And I still said, I'm still going to review your options to do with trusts and whole of life policy, but I'm not going to be recommending anything because it's going to completely upend everything I've been working on in your actual stated objectives. So that was probably the big stumbling block for me. Another one, I think I alluded to it earlier, but about the boats. The boat was a big sort of surprise to me at the beginning of the assessment because of all this additional information you might need to do with boats. I've rarely been on boats. I don't really know too much about them, and I had it in my head that I needed to find an assumption for boat depreciation. I was going round and around in circles with this. Every single website had a different assumption for how a boat depreciates over time. Some of them would say, it loses 20% in the first year, and then the next few years it loses 5% a year until year 8. Another one would say it loses 30% in the first 2 years, and then after then it's 5% or 10% each year. And I couldn't find any sort of consensus. I was almost on the brink of of purchasing a magazine subscription to a boating website just purely so I could get some
Find out.
it's just a peek behind the curtain and see if there's anything I'm missing, And there was the mooring costs as well. I didn't know what I was supposed to be including, and it's not like where you could go on Office for National Statistics and then actually get verifiable data. This is that you could use for an assumption. So the way I got around a lot of these stumbling blocks is I was again fortunate to be with family and working on it full time, and I would take a lot of walks. I'd listen to these podcasts, so it's funny being featured on it now. And while I'd listen to some of your other guests talking about them, it would spark something in my head. And I suddenly questioned, do I actually need this assumption? I was desperately wondering how do I know how a boat depreciates? But and I don't know if I'm supposed to really talk about this because it could be potentially something that other candidates need to figure out themselves. But for myself, I realised that you only need to know what the future value of a boat is going to be in these death scenarios. So
Yes.
if both clients were to pass away right now, you're in the estate planning scenario with those calculations, in which case the boat hasn't depreciated at all because it's happening right now. So if the boat is 80k, then in your calculations, it's going to be 80k. If only one of them dies, well, you're now in those stress test scenarios. And because of the age of my clients, they would be living for another 20, 30 years. The one consensus I found online across all those boating websites was that after 20 years, your boat's probably going to be worthless. It doesn't matter what they say in the interim, but after 20 years, you can still go on it and have fun and sail it, but you're not going to be able to probably get any money for it because there's been another 19, 20 generations of boats out there. So I then just did a uniform, I think, depreciation assumption all the way down to 1 penny, which is effectively zero. And I did that, and I realized that's all I needed. So there's a lot of emphasis, and rightly so, on assumptions. And you think I'm sure a lot of candidates will miss out on assumption they should have done. But it never really occurred to me that I was actually making an assumption such a hard task for myself when it wasn't even needed in the first place. So that's the thing, though. With time, you just kind of figure out all these different aspects.
Absolutely. Assumptions definitely one of my favorite areas, but we could create a million assumptions, couldn't we, for any given financial plan? But it's whether you're going to use them and how you're going to use them that actually matter. So like you say, well, yes, you could go down a rabbit hole looking for, average depreciation and all the rest of it. But actually, what are you going to be using it for? So if you're not using it, or you're only using it in one particular scenario, then is there a simplifying assumption that you could use, which is the one that you came to? And it will be different. That logic and that thought process will be different in all of us. And it doesn't mean to say that, for anybody who's listening to it, who maybe has this case study and they're going, oh, yikes, I've done something different, that actually it's not about the number, is it? It's more about the reason behind why you've done what you've done.
Absolutely. The assumptions are the absolute skeleton of the reports. I dedicated 2 pages of assumptions in the actual report. I think that's more than you suggested.
Yes.
I can't remember. Oh, okay. And but I did that for a particular reason. I had them all bullet pointed, each on 1 line, bullet points all the way down, 2 pages of them, including the ones you're provided, such as the equity and inflation returns. And not only that, I ordered them in the order of where they appear in the report. So it was sequential, and that then meant that if another assumption sort of popped up during my work, I'd know exactly where to put it, and it was just easier to keep track of it all. Again, I think in the appendices, I dedicated 7 pages, which again, is that more than you suggested?
I think it was 5 to 7 max that I was saying to everybody. So you were right on the cusp.
Right on the cusp. So that was, quite a beefy appendix for just explaining everything. So you've got 9 pages there dedicated to assumptions, and that's not even counting the ones you explain in the report. So yeah, a good sixth of the entire document was to do with explaining why you're doing all these things. So yeah, it's yeah, very, very important.
And just going back a second, the phrases that were put into the case study, they said that they didn't want their family to, pay any inheritance tax. Lots of people get tied up on phrases like that. And if these were real clients, obviously you would go back to them, wouldn't you? And you'd say, hey, you've said this, what exactly do you mean by that?
Yes.
But obviously in the case study, you don't have that luxury to go back to them, do you? So you've kind of got to make a decision and get on with it.
No, I'd love to say, yeah, what do you mean by this phrase, and why are you spending £6,000 on clothes? And it would be a lot easier. But yeah, as you say, it's it's impossible to do that.
Absolutely. So it's about making that decision, keeping up that forward momentum, because if you let things like this tie you in a knot and leave you in a knot, then you never really get to the end, do you? Because you start making other mistakes because you've got so many things going around in your head. Lots of people report it that at different parts of the process, they feel quite overwhelmed. And you can see why, can't you? When you build it all up and you start to, you go down that rabbit hole and you just think, oh my God, I can't make a decision. And actually, that's the whole point of, having our group sessions and our one-to-ones for me to keep chivying you along, to keep making those decisions and make that forward progress.
Absolutely. As I said earlier, I went for lots of walks, and then when we had our one-to-one sessions, both times actually, I wrote just on an A4 piece of paper. I think I wrote 30 questions each time. And when we had the call, I think initially I just said, "Hi, Jackie, do you mind if we just jump straight into it? Because you only have 30 minutes." And I just quick fired all of these, and they were again some of those earlier sort of silly questions about expenditure, but then all the way up to how different tabs interact. That was really valuable because that's built into the course to refer to you as a resource in that way. So yeah, if people are stuck, I guess my advice would be go for a walk, question if it's about assumptions, question whether you actually need it, and then make sure you make the most of those sessions with Jackie, because I don't think I would have got the result I did had I not.
Well, thank you for that. That's very kind. But you were the one who did all the hard work. I was just doing the chivying along. So looking back then, how many hours in total do you think that it took you to complete your assessment? Because you are one of the very privileged few, actually, who passed your assessment on the very first submission, didn't you?
I did, yes. And
congratulations.
I couldn't really believe it, because you don't get your mark through either. And it wasn't until a couple of weeks later when I got my mark through, and I'd only dropped one mark in the end. I think there were 110 assessment standards. So I was in disbelief, really. But I think that was down to having everything ready in the final few days. And then, as I said, just hoovering up all of those assessment standards. You can't just answer the assessment standards. It needs to be a full report. But I think, so you asked how many hours. I have two answers here, really. I've got a short answer and a long answer. Short answer is I don't know, but that's just quite a boring answer. So I thought I'd try and work out a figure. And given you're very much into your assumptions, I thought I'd assume, well, we got 10 weeks to do the case study. I was probably on average working 6 days out of a week. And I was treating it very much as my full-time job. So some days were longer than this, some days were shorter, but around about 7 hours probably I'd be working on it with regular breaks. But when I get involved with something, I just get very engrossed with it. So this does sound completely ridiculous, but I reckon I did a minimum of somewhere in the region of about 400 hours, which does sound quite crazy, really. But I think from my own perspective, I was out of the country for a year. I didn't think about financial planning, and I thought it would be an easy way to get back into the profession, and I was just completely wrong. So I just really stepped up the gears. It certainly wasn't 7 hours a day at the beginning, but after having to restart it a few times, yeah, I think it probably ended up around there. It is an estimate, but I think I'm in a quite a privileged position where I was able to have that time. I have a huge amount of admiration and respect for people who have, families and full-time jobs and all these commitments, having to do this work before their working day or after or at the weekends in their own time, because it's hugely difficult. It's how I describe the process is it's very cerebral. You're thinking about it even when you're not working on it,
Yes.
and it can be for your brain does kind of overheat doing it. So I think the lesson from me would probably be time is your biggest asset, and when contracts and salary come into it, I know it's probably a difficult one to negotiate, but if you want to have more time on the case study, maybe look at sabbatical or part-time or study days. I know some companies do study days because it just allows you to be fresher. You're not completely knackered from work, and then you can really dedicate that time and pour yourself into it. So those would be my suggestions, I think.
Fantastic. And I think, you say everybody I think I've interviewed has said that, by the time they submit their first submission, we always say it's, we're going all in, aren't we? Max effort for the first submission. So even if we fall short, it's a small hurdle to get over to pass on the second submission. But actually that takes so much time, so much headspace to get your head around, and all of those hours, like you say, of you've committed, and all your podcast listening, and you're pondering, and you're like, well, somebody else has done it that way. Does that mean I should do it this way? Or actually, I don't really need to do it that way. And you just, go around in a great big circle, don't you? So I think, it's really important to those people who are listening or who are in the middle of the process, perhaps, or about to start on their own journey on the level 7, is to think through why you're doing what you're doing, and just let your thoughts, ponder and dwell on them a little bit. Let your subconscious do some of the heavy lifting, rather than you kind of sit down, for an hour in the evening, go, right, I'm going to achieve this in an hour, because your brain doesn't have, that capability always once you've done a full day's work, like you say, or with other personal commitments. Your brain needs that time to wind down from all of that, doesn't it? Which you're very fortunate that you didn't have to do that. But you can imagine now, doing the full-time job that you are doing and trying to squeeze in the case study assessment around that would be, quite a mountain.
I have no idea how I'd do it. Because I was away for so long, I wanted to put myself on a level playing field. So I guess in some ways I was, just in terms of being fresh, I think I came back 2 tax years after I'd left, and everything was just completely different. Yikes. And so I was at a disadvantage in that way. But then just managed to level the playing field. Yes. I remember my last question to you on the second face-to-face call we had was, like I think I said, Jackie, I think it's going well, but can I just ask you for priority processing? For what's it called, rapid resubmission? How does a rapid resubmission work for the case study? By that point, I'd actually, I was thinking, I need to pass this first time, and it's important, for career development. I'm sure a lot of other people think, it's important to pass first time, but as soon as I kind of considered that you can take 2 or 3 submissions, I accepted that. It completely took all the pressure off, and it allowed me to, as you alluded to one of the other candidates, it just allowed me to stop worrying about it. Really, it was just when I sat down, there was no emotion in it. Now it's, well, this is going to take a couple tries. Let's get to work. And as soon as you do that, you can actually, and I know it sounds crazy at the beginning, but you do actually derive enjoyment from it when it's all going well. So you just have to keep pushing through it. Don't be afraid to restart, and consider trying to increase your time if that's even possible.
Yeah. And so do you think now, looking back on the way that you gave advice and the power planning work that you did before you went away traveling, and comparing to your approach at Close Brother Asset Management now, post gaining your certified financial planner assessment pass. Do you think that those two things are different, and how have you changed as a person in that time?
Absolutely, I think so. I've already alluded a lot to this already, but with when I was in my previous job, my previous career before traveling, I was doing a lot of these regularly. The work I was doing was fairly varied. It was for lots of different advisors. I was getting lots of exposure and talking to clients. However, we were quite investment focused, not too much protection work, very, very pensions focused as well. And so it can be, depending on where you work, sometimes the scope of your actual exposure to certain areas can be quite limited. What I found with my new company is everything is basically on offer in terms of planning. So each week I'm getting completely different reports. I'm getting things which are to do with setting up trusts or ISA transfers or fund switches or interesting pension cases and that sort of thing. And it's just really varied. I'm still in my early months, so there's still a bit of a sign-off process to go, but eventually, I've already expressed this that cash flow planning is something I'm really interested in. So yeah, I'd say that would be the main, I guess, legacy from the CFE is, as I said before, viewing it all as a closed loop rather than it just being these separate domains. So yeah, it's completely changed my outlook on it as well, and it's good to be in that community as well of CFP. It's a very sort of emerging community.
An extremely supportive community I found over the years. That, I spoke to somebody the other day and they said to me, if those who aren't CFPs sometimes are quite reluctant to share best practice or advice in particular areas when you're struggling. And actually, I haven't found that at all. In fact, quite on the opposite with the Certified Financial Planner community, not just in the UK, but actually around the world as well. So hopefully, as you progress in your career and you come across and meet and engage with other certified financial planners, you'll find the same too.
Yeah, I hope so too.
So we are nearly at the end of our interview today, Ciaran, and I just wanted to ask you one final question. What advice would you give to those who are starting their journey to become CFP professionals today?
So the first thing I would suggest, and I've said this lots of times already, but number one is time. It's your biggest asset. If there is any way that you can increase the amount of time that you can work on this, the alternative is accept that it could take 2 or 3 submissions. That certainly would have been the case for me. I was just very privileged to be able to stay with family for those 10 weeks and work on it full time. So time is your biggest asset. Take it from someone who had to restart a lot and was asking very silly questions in the first few weeks. So that would be my number one. Number two would be your first draft doesn't have to be perfect, but your last draft needs to be flawless. And by flawless, I don't mean 100%. I just mean it needs to be presented well. It needs to look like a report. It shouldn't look like an exam or answers to a test. It needs to flow from one section to the other. The most important thing is no spelling errors. And you can be quite liberal as well with the design. You don't have to follow a particular sort of layouts. You can make the tables look more interesting. You can add some color in the pie charts. Make it an interesting document to actually go through. It doesn't all have to be black and white. I had a sort of a technique towards the end. It was inspired by how you said, your last couple of weeks should look. And what I did is I created my first draft. I knew that huge swathes of the report were not ready, for submission. But I just wanted to get everything on one document with all the different sections. I think it was 3 pages too much. I think I'd done 63 pages. And, there were big paragraphs where it sounded like they were straight out of a textbook. And, some tables might have been incomplete. But I just wanted to have the first draft done. And I printed that double-sided and double-paged. So, you're only printing about sort of 15 pages. And then I would leave it, and then I would then take the next day off, and I wouldn't think about it. I would then come back the day after, and with a pen, I would go through and effectively grill myself with my examiner hat on, circling things, question marks. What does this mean? Why haven't you explained this? And critiquing it quite a lot. And by the end of my first draft, it was completely covered in ink. And I then set about making draft 2, did the same thing again, printed it off, left it, took the next day off, came back, and then did the same thing, rinse and repeat, writing all my notes and then making the next draft and the next draft and the next draft. Eventually, I think it was probably like my 5th or 6th draft. Eventually, I stopped making amendments. I was reading through it and it flowed from one section to the other. All the figures were right. I'd considered all the information, and importantly, those tables you put at the end in the appendices, make sure you link them to what you're saying in the reports. So you'll say, as you see in Appendix 16, with this, and just tying everything together so that there's no loose ends. You can only really do that if you just take a bit of a break, like a bit of a breather from it. So that's what I did. And in the end, I was actually very, very confident with the submission I'd made, and was delighted with the result. But it was primarily down to having the time to toil through it, really. And then number 3, I would say, present and word the reports like it's your parents who are reading it. So that means a couple of different things. And I kind of I've used this example or this sort of way of thinking in the past when I'm working in my job. It's really important that you're presenting a report in a coherent, considered, respectable manner. Clients are, paying money to have your professional advice, and there's absolutely no room for errors or anything. There is also no room for, jargon. In the past, the industry has, kept a lot of jargon so that they can charge higher fees. But now, since MiFID and you have everything now of influencers, things are just becoming a lot more simplified in the way that they're portrayed. And I know from personal experience with my own parents, it does often take a couple explanations for them to fully understand, the difference between a DB and a DC and a pension and an ISA. But it's because you need to just sort of make it very clear to them. Don't assume that they know everything you're talking about in the reports. And that will actually serve you quite well, because there may well be some assessment standards saying, have they clearly explained this? So those would be my 3. Time, having enough time at the end as well to sort of draft, and don't be afraid to have a non-perfect first draft. And then thirdly, write it as if it's your parents receiving it.
Ciaran, thanks so much for joining me. Some fantastic tips there. And I'm sure that all of our listeners are going to get stacks and stacks of inspiration and tips from you. Thanks so much for joining me today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Jackie.
It's really interesting, isn't it, to listen to different people who have different experiences of gaining their certified financial planner certification, or maybe developing the financial planning profession at large. If you know anybody who you think might be interested in listening to any of these podcasts, then please do pass on our details. That's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. See you again soon. Bye for now.